Hello, everyone, and welcome to our event Under the Stars. We're going to get started in just a few minutes just to let more people have time to enter the meeting. But in the meantime, if you'd like to introduce yourself, maybe say how you found out about Elbow Lake and where you're joining us from tonight in the chat, that would be awesome. We'd love to hear from you.
Hey everyone, it's great to have you all.
Looks like we've got people from not just Kingston here tonight, which is very exciting. Thanks for introducing yourself, everyone. All right, we can get started, and then if people join late, we will be recording this. I'll mention a little bit more later, and so they'll be able to join in on the first little bit afterwards. But hello, everyone, and welcome to Elbow Lake Environmental Education Center's virtual family night. We are very excited to have you all with us this evening for our event titled Under the Stars, where we'll be learning more about our exciting world of the outer space, including stars and the solar system, as well as the Perseids meteor shower, which is happening now. My name is Megan, and I am one of the Outreach and Stewardship interns at the Biology Station, otherwise known as CUBES. And I'm here tonight with my coworker, Lindsay, and we will be your hosts this evening. We are sadly not astronomers, even though that would be pretty cool, but tonight we will be along with all of you. We will be recording this event, as I mentioned, and it will be uploaded to the Queen's University Biological Station YouTube channel, just for those who aren't able to join us tonight. And so we'd love for you to keep your cameras on or turn them on and interact with us if you're comfortable. But with that being said, we completely understand if you'd rather keep your camera off and stay muted for the evening.
So before we get started, I just wanted to take a minute to acknowledge the traditional territory that we are situated on. So Queen's University is situated on traditional Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory. Specifically, the Elbow Lake Environmental Education Center is situated on unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory and is a part of the Algonquin land claim by the Algonquins of Ontario, currently under negotiation with the federal government of Canada. Acknowledgement of these facts requires recognition of the pre-colonial history of this land and the peoples who lived here and continue to live here. The cultures and spiritualities of Indigenous peoples are connected to the land, and the land is an integral part of their ways of knowing and living. These knowledge systems are continually evolving in relation to the land and its other inhabitants, both human and other than human. The Kingston Indigenous community continues to reflect the area's Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee roots. There is also a significant Métis community, and there are First Peoples from other nations across Turtle Island present here today.
Thank you, Lindsay. For those of us not in Kingston, we'd encourage you to take the time to find out whose traditional lands you are living on. And even though we can't host this event from Elbow Lake like we normally would, we still want to welcome you to Elbow Lake. The Elbow Lake Environmental Education Center is the public outreach arm of the Queen's University Biological Station, otherwise known as CUBES. CUBES is situated within the Frontenac Arch, which is a part of Ontario where the ancient Precambrian shields of the north extend down into the southern parts of Ontario, which connects towards the Adirondack Mountains in New York State. The Grenville Mountains, which used to stand here, used to be as tall as the Himalayas in size once, but over time they've worn down through erosion. The Frontenac Arch is a really important piece of land because it has overlap of the north and the south, similar to a funnel, which gives rise to a great deal of biodiversity. So in this quick little video, you can see where Elbow Lake is situated, but we encourage you to kind of zone out or zoom out with us as we explore the wonderful world of space. So you can see just kind of a little video of Google Maps of us slowly exploring and seeing where we're situated in the wider outer space. And there we go. But yeah, so as that video showed, if we were to leave Earth, if we were to like zoom way far out on Google Maps or take a spaceship out in space, we would end up in outer space. But what exactly does that mean? In space, no one can hear you yell. This is because there is no air in space, but it's actually a vacuum. But it's not this kind of vacuum. Sound waves cannot travel through space because of this fact. Outer space begins about 100 kilometers above the Earth, where the shell of air around our planet disappears, and the atmosphere which is the atmosphere that's held by gravity. And so with no air to scatter sunlight and produce a blue sky, space appears as a black blanket dotted with stars. So even though space appears black, it's not empty. The huge gaps between the stars and planets are filled with lots of thinly spaced gases and dust, and it's also filled with many forms of radiation that can be dangerous to astronauts. Most of this radiation comes from the sun, either in infrared or ultraviolet types of radiation. radiation. Space has fascinated scientists for millennia, and yet despite massive technological advancements, there's still so much unknown. And so tonight we're going to take our virtual telescope and see what's out there. But first, we want to hear what you guys know about space. So what do you think is already out there in space? And you can unmute yourselves and say your answers out loud, or type them into the chat like you were doing earlier.
Yeah. Stars.
Yeah, there's stars. Awesome.
You can kind of see some of them there on the screen too. You won't find SpongeBob in space.
There might be some spaceships out there, though.
Other planets, says Joanne.
Awesome.
Hold on. Now say it. And Saturn, yes. Satellites.
Yeah, great answer. And that's how we got that video of us zooming out of Earth. That was taken from satellites. Awesome.
The Milky Way.
The Milky Way, yeah, nice job.
These are all great answers, and we're going to talk about a lot of them too. All right, so I think I heard someone say, actually, I won't give it away. But so next we're going to talk about the solar system. But before we do that, does anyone know the planets of our solar system? Does anyone know what planets are out there, or what planet we live on?
Earth.
Yeah, we live on Earth.
Great job.
So there's 8 planets. Does anybody know which one is the biggest planet out there, or in our solar system?
The sun, I think.
The sun is a kind of a star. It's not actually defined as a planet, but in terms of size, you're right. The sun is way bigger than all the other planets in the solar system. It's huge. It doesn't look that big in our sky, but it's actually really big when you compare it to the size of Earth. But if Megan would just give a little click on the slide there, there is our solar system. And so we have the sun in the middle, and then we have the other objects that are rotating around the sun. And so closest to the sun, we have 4 fairly small rocky planets. And so closest to the sun, we have Mercury, and then Venus, and then Earth, where we are, and then Mars. And beyond Mars, there is a bit of a region called the asteroid belt, which is populated by millions of rocky objects. So if you've ever seen a space movie and people are trying to drive their spaceship through all these rocks, they're most likely in the asteroid belt, and it makes for some really dramatic movies. And so these asteroids in the asteroid belt are rocks that are left over from the formation of the planets 4.5 billion years ago, which is way, way before the dinosaurs even. And on the other side of the asteroid belt, we have the 4 planets that we call the gas giants. And so the first one there is Jupiter, which is the biggest planet in our solar system. And then we have Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. And so we call them gas giants because they're made of gas. And that means that if you were to take a spaceship out to one of those planets, you would not be able to stand on them like you can stand on the ground of Earth. And they're much bigger than Earth, as you can see in the photo there, but they're super, super lightweight. And they're mostly made of the elements hydrogen and helium. And if you don't know what helium is, it's what we put in balloons to make them rise up. So it's really, really light. And up until recently, the furthest known planet was an icy world called Pluto. However, many astronomers think that it's too small to be called a true planet, and now we don't typically include it. So if that sounds like a lot of names and you're not sure how to remember those, there is this little sentence that we call a mnemonic. And if you remember this sentence, it will help you to remember the names of the planets. And so it's called, "My very excellent mother just served us nachos." See, she's right there. And if you remember that sentence, the first letter of every word in that sentence corresponds to a name of the planet. So the word "my" starts with an M, and that can help you remember that Mercury is the first planet. And then the next word is "very," which starts with a V. for Venus, and so on. So if you say to yourself, my very excellent mother just served us nachos, and you can remember that, it might help you to remember the names of the planets.
Thank you, Lindsay. I know that I've used that sentence quite a few times. Now, I know you guys mentioned also that there's stars out in the sky, and in fact, our sun is actually a star. And so like people, stars are born, they grow old, and then they die. Their birthplaces, so kind of like their baby crib, are huge cold clouds of gas and dust, and these are known as nebulas. So stars are a lot of cosmic energy that produce heat, light, UV radiation, X radiation, and other forms of radiation. And they're composed largely of gas and plasma, which is like a really, really hot state of matter composed of subatomic particles, which is a little bit complicated, but no one really knows how many stars exist. Some people can see about 3,000 stars when you look with a fancy telescope. But because there's so many different stars and galaxies, and we think that there's about 100 billion galaxies that exist, each one of those holds 100 billion stars. So if you do the math, there's so many stars out there. Some of these stars will look brighter in the sky than others, and that's for a variety of reasons. How bright a star is depends on their luminosity, so how much energy they are putting out into space, as well as how far away from Earth they are. So if there's a star that's a lot closer to Earth, it's going to appear a lot brighter in the sky, just like the sun is a lot brighter than some of the stars that we see at night. Hot stars look kind of white or blue, whereas cooler stars look more like an orange and a red. And there's also different sizes of stars. So some of them are dwarfs, and some of them are supergiants. And supergiants are like 1,000 times bigger than our own sun. Young stars will be born, and they're born in nebulas, as I mentioned. And then as they grow up, they're going to develop by accumulating mass from hydrogen gas clouds. So the hydrogen gas that's around them, they're going to kind of suck in, and they're going to take in, and they're going to grow up. Stars evolve over billions and billions of years, and the larger a star is, the shorter its lifespan will be. So that's because as they age, so as they grow up, their hydrogen that's in them, their gas, is converted to helium, which is what makes balloons rise. And helium will sink to the core of the star, the middle of it, and raise the star's temperature, causing it to expand and swell. And so the big stars are called red giants, and these stars will shed their outer layers and then shrink to become a small dense body called a white dwarf. Some stars will also go out with a bang called a supernova and leave behind a very small core at the end.
Cool. So we had one of our audience members mention the Milky Way out in space, and that is definitely correct. And so nearly all of the stars belong to these really big groups, and we call them galaxies, and they look really pretty. And so the sun and its planets, just like Earth, are in this part of the Milky Way galaxy. So the Milky Way is our galaxy. And we're situated about halfway out from the center. And the sun is at least one of 100 billion stars in the Milky Way, and there are billions of galaxies in the universe. So I can't even comprehend how big that is, but there are just so many galaxies out there in the universe. And so the Milky Way galaxy, our galaxy, is shaped like a huge whirlpool, and it rotates once every 200 million years, which is a really long time. And we think that it's made up of at least 100 billion stars, as well as dust and gas. And the center of the galaxy is kind of hard to see because of the clouds of gas and dust that block our view. But scientists think that it contains a supermassive black hole that swallows anything that passes too close. But we don't know for sure.
Another thing that you may see in space are meteor showers, and that's actually what's happening tonight and happening the past few days. And so the solar system, so kind of everything that's out in space within our galaxy, is full of material left over from the different births of all the planets, including space rocks. There's different words used to name these space rocks depending on where they are and where they go. So small chunks of rock that travel through space are known as meteoroids, which is the first word on the slide there. And then once they enter a planet's atmosphere and burn up, then they're seen as meteors, which look like shooting stars in the sky. Most of these meteors are smaller than a grain of sand, and so as soon as they kind of touch through the atmosphere, they'll disintegrate. But sometimes larger pieces of rock will survive long enough to crash into the planet's surface, and any space rock that lands onto the Earth's surface are known as meteorites.
So meteors can be seen at any time, but the best time to look for them is during periodic meteor showers. And so such meteor showers appear around the same dates each year when Earth passes through a stream of dust that's left behind by a passing comet. And so one example of a meteor shower that we're in right now is called the Perseids meteor shower. And so the Perseids meteor shower takes place every year in the summer. And this year its peak, or when it's the most noticeable, is from August 11th to 13th. So if you went out yesterday, maybe you saw some meteors in the sky. And so during this time, the rate of meteors reaches about 60 or more per hour. And it's named Perseids because the meteors that you see look like they're coming from the Perseus constellation. And if you don't know what the Perseus constellation is, we're going to help you identify that soon. But most meteors are visible during the night before the sun comes up. Because they're glowing when it's daylight, it's really hard to see something glowing in the sky because the sun makes it so bright. But once nighttime comes, it's much easier to see these shooting stars in the sky. If you're able to wake up early, it's definitely worth it. And it will be easier to see them past midnight before the sun comes up. But go to bed if your bedtime is before then. But to watch the meteor shower, all you need to do is look up. You don't need any fancy equipment, fancy telescopes. All you need to do is look up. And so you can look either east or northwest in the sky. If you know where the Big Dipper is, which you also will soon, look in its direction and you are bound to see some Perseids. And if you need help knowing which way is east and which way is north, remember that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, which might help, or you can use a compass. And so if you have a smartphone, you may have a compass on your smartphone.
So some things that may be a little bit confusing when we talk about space is the difference between astrology and astronomy. And these are both words used to describe the study of celestial objects, but there are some differences between them. So if we're talking about astrology, it's the study of celestial objects, so like the planets and the stars, and these are used to learn more about human behavior as well as earthly events. So originally it was used to kind of interpret divine communication, but now a common aspect of astrology is star signs. Astronomy, on the other side of things, is also the study of planets and stars, but it uses math, physics, and chemistry in order to explain the origin and evolution of these objects. So astronomy would look more at the moon, the stars, and planets, and it's based on scientific evidence. Since both of these studies are focused on objects in space, there is some overlap between them. And so, for example, if you consider the constellation named Taurus, when you're considering Taurus, scientists can study the constellation of stars, but it's also an astrological star sign.
So for the rest of our time together tonight, we're going to be learning about constellations and what they are, and what some are that you will be able to go out and identify in the sky, maybe tonight. And so what a constellation is it's a group of stars that look like a particular shape in the sky, and we also give them a name. And so some stars in constellations might be close, and others might be really far away from us, but sometimes it's hard to tell. They might all look like they're the same level of brightness or the same distance away from us, but we can still connect them and make constellations. So stars are not actually connected to each other at all, but what we can do is we can draw imaginary lines in the sky between the stars, so kind of like completing a dot puzzle. And so the picture that you get after you connect all the stars might look like an object, an animal, or a person. And so constellations have been used to tell stories, honor religious heroes, understand agricultural seasons, and to help with navigation as well. Many constellations have their roots in the knowledge of the ancient Greeks. However, it is important to recognize that cultures all over the world have created constellations that reflect the stories most important to them. And constellations are not one for one between cultures, as each has their own star patterns that may just happen to overlap with other ones. But before we get into constellations, we're just curious. What constellations have you seen? Or are there any stories that you know of? I think I kind of gave away a couple names earlier. But just curious if anyone has a favorite constellation that maybe they know about. You don't have to know exactly where it is, but if there's a name that you might know, maybe. I see someone's hand up.
Is one the Big Dipper?
The Big Dipper is one, yeah. Have you seen it?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Right. Cassiopeia.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really pretty one. And a pretty name too. Joanne says, is there a belt one? There is a constellation that can be easily identified by finding the person's belt. Yes.
We'll talk about that one in a little bit. So it was a little sneak peek. Thanks, Joanne.
Those are all great answers. All right, so before we get into the constellation pictures, we also just wanted to acknowledge that Queen's University in Kingston is situated on shared traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. And so both cultural groups share some elements, but they are also very different and diverse. And so to understand these various groups and their cultural diversity, we would have to experience the context in which they lived, including their geography and their relationship with the land, sky, and stars in each season. And so Indigenous star stories are not just stories of higher beings like gods and their encounters, but they're also seen as part of an all-encompassing perspective of life and spirituality. So everything like the planets, animals, water, sky, and air are interwoven together in a complex web of life, understanding, and respect. And so the stars are a key part of that understanding. And so Anishinaabe-Moan is the language of the Anishinaabe and is a language of action and doing. And so the language speaks of the science that's out there in space, like how something functions and its state of being. And so to the Anishinaabe, stars are animate because they move and have a spirit. Spirituality plays a big part in the universe because of both movement and energy. The Anishinaabe creator got their idea of creating the plans from the stars. So everything starts with the stars. Learning to understand the stars is extremely important in aiding to predict both the weather and seasonal migration and other activities that are important in one's life. And Haudenosaunee tradition tells us that the sun and moon existed before the creation of Earth, but stars had been mortals, like humans, or favored animals and birds. So just different ways of looking at the stars.
I also just wanted to mention that both Lindsay and I are non-Indigenous, but we just wanted to share some of the stories that knowledge keepers have shared with us and have shared online. So yeah, just a little preface. Constellations are also used in a variety of ways. And so not only are they just really pretty to look up at the sky, but scientists and many different people have used them for centuries and thousands of years for a variety of different ways. But tonight we're going to talk a little bit more about agriculture, navigation, as well as religion and storytelling. And so agriculture, stars were used to determine when to sow and when to harvest. So they show kind of how seasons pass through time, as you can see this as the earth moves around and the stars change. And so constellations made the patterns of stars easy to remember. For example, if Orion, so that's kind of the sneak peek to the belt that Joanne was talking about earlier, if Orion was fully visible, then it meant that winter was coming soon. And so looking at constellations and studying them allowed farmers to plan ahead and plan their agriculture to make sure that everything would be growing in time. Constellations are also really helpful for navigation. So it can be pretty easy to spot Polaris, or the North Star in the sky, once you found the Little Dipper constellation. And you can figure out where you are on the Earth, your latitude, once you've looked at how high Polaris is in the sky. So this allowed for ships to travel across the globe as they figured out where they were on Earth and can navigate from there. Constellations are also really prominent in a lot of religions. For example, the positions of the stars in the sky, people believe were God's ways of telling them stories. And many ancient Greece named constellations after their mythological heroes and legends. And that's what we're going to talk also a little bit more about tonight.
So the constellation you've all been waiting for, the Big Dipper, is called Ursa Major. And then we also have the Little Dipper, which is known as Ursa Minor. And so these are some of the most familiar patterns in the sky. And so the Big Dipper is most easily found by identifying the cup and then the long handle. And so if you look at the first picture here at the top left, you can kind of see there's almost like a rectangle or a cup. I don't think I can point at this, but in the middle there, and then you can kind of see 3 stars coming off of it to the left to make the handle. And so that's one way of being able to identify it. And so the Big Dipper constellation is easily seen in the summer months in the northernmost part of the sky. And so the ancient Greeks associated the Big Dipper constellation with the myth of Callisto, who was a beautiful nymph. And so the god Zeus saw the nymph one day and he fell in love. The two of them had a son named Arcus. And so Zeus's wife was jealous and turned Callisto into a bear. And when Arcus drew his spear on the bear, not knowing it was his mother turned into a bear, Zeus quickly turned them both into constellations. And so Arcus is also known as Ursa Minor and lies in the sky with Ursa Major. So that is how the ancient Greeks see the story of the Big Dipper and Little Dipper. And Ursa Minor, or the Little Dipper, which is the bottom picture there, it kind of looks like an upside down version of the Big Dipper, is notable for marking the location of Polaris, the North Star, which is located at the end of the Little Dipper's handle. So if you look at the Little Dipper on the slide there, if you follow the handle all the way to the right, there will be a really bright star there. You can't really see it, but the last star of the handle is Polaris, the North Star, and it's really bright. So it might help you be able to find it. And so the Big Dipper is not only recognized by the Greeks as a part of Ursa Major, but it's also known as the African drinking gourd, which slaves used to escape slavery through the Underground Railroad. The British saw the Big Dipper stars as a plow, whereas the Germans saw it as a wagon. And Hindu people saw it as the Septarshi, with each star being one of their 7 sages. The people of the Middle East saw it as a funeral procession with the 4 stars of the Big Dipper's bowl being a coffin. And the Chinese saw it as a seat of governmental power. And so different groups of people have different ways of seeing these patterns of stars in the sky. And the Haudenosaunee saw a bear within this region, but the bear itself was the bowl of the Dipper, and the tail was actually 3 hunter birds chasing the bear. And so this constellation was used to mark the changing of seasons as it rotated around the North Star. And to the Anishinaabe people, this pattern of stars actually isn't a bear, but it is known to them as Ojeeg the Fisher. And so by being both strong and brave, Ojeeg rescued the birds of summer, but to the cost of his own life. To commemorate his bravery, his image was placed amongst the stars for all to see. The stars within the region of Little Bear was known to the Anishinaabe as Mong, the loon. Both Ojeeg and Mong are beautiful constellations and are just a few that are known to Indigenous peoples. And so you can see their interpretation of those constellations there.
Our next constellation is the constellation Orion. So according to Greek mythology, Orion was in love with Merope, but Merope would have nothing to do with him. Orion's life ended when he was killed by Scorpius the scorpion, and the gods felt sorry for him, so they put him and his dogs up in the sky as constellations. They also put all of the animals he hunted up there near him, but Scorpius, the one who killed him, was placed on the opposite side of the sky, so Orion would never be hurt by it again. Orion is one of the most prominent and recognizable constellations that can be seen throughout the world. So you can look for the 3 bright stars that form the straight line of the hunter's belt. So there's 3 stars right in a row. And then you can follow the brightest star if you see the 3 stars in a row in a sky, if you follow that up to the bright star that forms the hunter's armpit, and then follow that east along the hunter's arm, which is holding a bow. To the Ojibwe people of the Great Lakes, this constellation is known as the Winter Maker and is an essential figure in the Ojibwe culture. He is a spirit that makes winter, and his outstretched arms rule the sky. The Ojibwe and other tribes would tell stories during the winter months when the snow was on the ground, and only during these months.
So another constellation that you may have heard of is called Taurus. You may know it as Taurus the bull. And the shape of Taurus kind of looks like the letter U. And so you can see it. There's one on the left there. It kind of looks like a U and then an upside down U. That's how I like to think of it. But you can think of it however works for you. But according to Greek mythology, when the god Zeus fell in love with the Phoenician princess Europa, he transformed himself into a white bull with golden horns named Taurus, and he carried Europa away. And so Zeus ended up placing the image of the bull up in the heavens. And in the northern hemisphere, the Taurus constellation passes through the sky from November to March. And Taurus is located above Orion and can be first identified by finding the large red star. And so that's what the arrow is pointing to there. And so if you can find that large red star, it's at the fork of the bull's horns. And also if you're able to find the constellation of Orion with the 3 stars on his belt, you can see here that Orion is pointing his bow kind of towards Taurus, which might help you locate them both.
Our next constellation is the Pleiades, and these are a cluster of stars that are highly visible in the northern hemisphere, and it's the cluster that's most visible by the human eye. It's northwest of the constellation Taurus, and it's also known as the Seven Sisters because they mark the start and end of the sailing season in ancient Greece. Each of these sisters is represented by a star, and they each had an individual name, meaning, and story. The Pleiades were also important for the Iroquois people because they were known as the dancing stars. How the story goes is there were 7 young brothers who were learning to dance. Believing that they had perfected their skill, they asked their mother to provide them with food for a journey. After she refused, they decided to keep dancing, but this time they danced a magical dance. The boys were circling in the air, high above the ground. Realizing too late what was happening, their mother pleaded with them to look down, but they ignored her pleas and continued to dance, all the while rising higher and higher. Again and again, she cried out, and finally the eldest looked down and immediately fell to the earth. For months afterwards, the woman watched the spot where her son had landed, and in the spring she noticed a tree beginning to grow, which became the first of the pines. Meanwhile, her other sons, the other brothers, continued their eternal sky dance, forming the dancing star clusters, the same cluster that the ancient Greeks had called the Pleiades. The Iroquois had traditionally began their annual cycle of ceremonies when the Pleiades reached their zenith, and after the last hunt of the season, and with the appearance of the new moon during the time that the dancing boys were directly overhead at sunset, the Iroquois celebrated the onset of the new year with a midwinter ceremony. So these stars were really important for their culture.
So here we have Gemini, as you can see, and you might know Gemini as being twins. So Gemini is Latin for twins, although the twins that are identified in the story depend on the cultural context that you put them in. So according to the Greek mythology, brothers named Castor and Pollux were known to share many adventures together, and they were bound very closely and they loved each other very much. When Castor was killed, unfortunately, his brother Pollux also began to die. And so Zeus the god took pity on Pollux and allowed him to share his life with Castor. And Castor and Pollux were then placed in the sky together, where they will never be separated. And so you can see the constellation there. Kind of looks like 2 people up in the sky, maybe holding hands. And so according to the ancient Greeks, that represents the brothers who will never be separated. And so Gemini is located northeast of Orion and between the Taurus and Cancer constellations. And the 2 brightest stars in the Gemini constellation represent the heads of the twins. And that's one of the ways you can identify them easier by their heads.
Our next constellation is Perseus, which happens to be the origin of the name of the Perseid meteor shower. And Perseus was the hero in Greek mythology. He was the son of Zeus and Danae, and his mother and he were locked in a wooden box and thrown into sea to perish by his grandfather. The box ended up floating to another land where the king, Polydectes, immediately fell in love with Perseus's mother. Perseus's mother, Danae, did not want to marry the king as she wished to spend time raising her son. The king Polydectes then gave Perseus a mission he knew was very dangerous, thinking that without Perseus, his mother would be free to marry him. His mission was to kill Medusa, which you can see in the photo here, by cutting off her head and bringing it back. Medusa was a gorgon, meaning that she had snakes for hair, and anyone who looked into her eyes would turn to stone. And so the other gods gave Perseus gifts to help him in his fight because they knew it would be quite dangerous. Perseus received a helmet to help him become invisible, a sword that was strong enough to cut off Medusa's head, winged sandals which allowed him to travel 7 miles in one stride. And using these gifts, he entered the cave, used a mirror to detect Medusa while he was invisible, and sliced off her head. He used the head to help rescue Andromeda from the sea monster Cetus. And then finally, when he returned with a success, he showed Medusa's head to Polydectes, and then him and the entire wedding congregation turns to stone, saving his mother from the marriage that she didn't want. And so to remember Perseus, the gods placed him in the sky as a constellation, and you can see him in this photo here.
All right, so now we have Leo, which you might know as Leo the lion, because the constellation of Leo resembles the shape of a lion. More specifically, the ancient Greeks referred to it as the Nemean lion that was killed by Hercules. And so weapons did not work on the lion, and Hercules had to fight the lion with his bare hands. And so when Hercules succeeded, Zeus celebrated his success by putting the lion into the stars, where they would remember it forever. And to the Anishinaabe peoples, this constellation is the big spirit cat who lives in bodies of water and can cause flooding, drowning, and other water dangers. The Anishinaabe people would put tobacco offerings in the water for the spirit before they go off in canoes so they would have safe travels. This constellation is visible overhead in spring when the Anishinaabe people knew that the ice is thawing. And so they would know that it would be dangerous to travel across waters when the ice is thawing. And traditionally, both the constellation and the thawing ice signaled that it was time to move from winter camps to the sugar bush camp. So as you can kind of see in the image there, there's not a perfect overlap between Leo, the lion, and the Anishinaabe big spirit cat, but it's fairly similar.
And our last constellation for the evening is Cygnus the Swan. So this constellation can be recognized by the Northern Cross. You can see there's kind of two sets of stars that look like they're shaped in the sign of the cross. And how the Cygnus got their story is that two gods were racing chariots in space, and they were so focused on the race that suddenly they were too close to their sun and the chariots began to melt. The gods started to fall towards the earth, where one landed in some trees to break its fall, and the other was knocked unconscious in a river. The one who landed in the tree wanted to help his friend, but he couldn't swim. So he asked Zeus to turn him into a swan so that he could dive to the bottom of the river and save his friend, which he was able to do. Zeus was so moved by this that he decided to put the swan into the sky once it died to remind everyone of courage and friendship. For the Ojibwe clan system was created to provide leadership and care for the needs of its people, such as protection, food, and medicine. There were 7 original clans which were given a function to serve for their people, and each clan was known by its animal emblem or totem. The animal totem symbolized the strength and the duties of the clan. The crane is one of the important leaders in the Ojibwe clan system, and the Ajijak, or the crane constellation, leads the Ojibwe people and helps them to stay strong. This constellation appears overhead a few hours after sunset in the summertime in the Northern Hemisphere.
All right, so I know we went through a lot of constellations, and you might be going, Megan and Lindsay, we are not going to remember those, but that is totally okay. So we do have some resources here to help you if you're interested in going stargazing and looking for some of these constellations. And so the first one that we recommend is called Stellarium, and it's a free open source database that you can use for your computer. And so you can just go, maybe Megan can put that link in the chat, or I'll do it. And you can just go to the website and you can see what the stars look like from where you are. And so you can use that to help you identify pictures. I believe there's like little check boxes that you can click to show you the pictures of constellations. So it will connect the dots for you. So you'll be able to see what is in the sky where you are currently located. And then the other 3 apps that we have are called Skyview Light, Starwalk, and Sky Guide. And what these are apps that some of them are free and some of them are paid. So if you're looking at getting an app, just make sure that you verify that you're aware if you're getting a free one or a paid one. But what they do is you can download them on a phone or a tablet if you have one, and you can go outside with this and you can take your device and you can point it up at the sky, and it will use your location to determine what stars are currently above you, and it will again connect the lines to form the constellations, and it will even show you the name and the picture. So what I like to do is open the app on my phone, point it at the sky, see what's there, and then I like to try to take my phone away and see if I can identify it without the guide. But it's a good way to learn some constellations that are currently above you. And we also have a guide that we have put together. And so Ebble Lake Environmental Education Center, thanks Megan, has a guide to constellations. And so I believe there are 5 constellations on there. And it's just a PDF file that will show you a picture of the constellation, tell you what its identifying features are, and a little bit about the story that might go along with it. And so if you want to bring that out with you as well to help remember the pictures, it's also a resource in the chat.
And then finally, the last resource we have is the star wheel. So I'll put that link in the chat too. And what that looks like is this. And how it works is that it has one circle with all the different constellations that appear in the entire night sky. And then it's got this handy little guide that gives you the time of day that you are. And so you can use this star guide, find the date where you are. So we are about August 12th, I believe, which is just here. I can slip it into the pocket and have it lined up with the time that it is. So if I put it to 8 p.m., Then when I look through this little circle, those are all the stars that I should be able to see in the sky tonight. So you can see the North Star, you can see some of the Big Dipper, you can see Cygnus, the swan, as well as some other ones there too. So put that link in the chat. You guys can print off the PDF and use the star wheel to see what stars are out near you tonight. And that's all we have this evening. We wish that we could all go outside tonight and go for a walk and try and spot what constellations are out, but also it's still sunny, so it might be a little bit tricky to find some stars, but we'd encourage you guys to use any of the resources that we suggested to go for a walk and see what constellations you can spot. And we also wanted to let you know that we have another virtual family night coming up on August 26th that's all about turtles. And so this is going to be on the official Cubes YouTube channel, as well as with our other recorded events from throughout the summer. We also have social media and a website where you guys can check out some fun facts about animals and different species, as well as our website where you can find some more activities. But that's all from us. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we can stick around if anyone has any questions.